Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sharp Vision with 25, the podcast that discusses the benefits of prioritizing project pricing in your business strategy and why it matters. Today, we have our co-founder and project manager, Richard Minney, and our solution architect, Alan Azar, on the podcast today to talk about all things aerospace and defense. So first question I have for you two is, what are the biggest estimating challenges that you see in the aerospace and defense industry today, and how are companies navigating them?
So the main thing is compliance. So aerospace and defense companies often doing a lot of government bids. I can imagine missiles and tanks and ships and whatnot are generally bought by the government. And they require a lot of compliance to regulations. So the biggest challenge they face is essentially providing bids that are compliant. That means providing a cost source. So any bid over $2 million, you have to provide the source of the cost. You have to explain how much it costs. Everyone's heard of the $400 hammer in the contract. That is a result of not going through and applying all the information. There's been a lot of recent fines for A&D companies. We did a search for all the fines, and there's been more than $1 billion of fines over the last few years for compliance in bidding and pricing. So that's the number one challenge. But there are other challenges as well, particularly the number of bids and the speed of turning around bids and the number of resources to do the proposals. So you can think of it as efficiency, output, lead time, trying to reduce all of that. The other issue, I think, the other challenge is the data volume. So the bigger firms in particular have very large bills of material with tens of thousands of parts. So you end up with a very large amount of data. It's just sheer management of that data can be a challenge as well.
And on top of that, with the compliance of it all, I think we have to take a look at the contract types that are created with defense business. A lot of the cost plus stuff where, the companies are guaranteed a percentage on top of their costs, right? So it needs to be auditable, the cost sources that they're using. And like Richard was saying, when you have these giant manufactured end items like an aircraft carrier or a plane or whatever, where you have thousands and thousands of parts, there needs to be auditable, right? There needs to be an audit trail. There's obviously regulations and rules, whether it's competitive bid, whether it's TINA, I think Richard was talking to earlier, where certain regulations come in to ensure that there is control over this type of spending.
Yeah, it's all about linking the cost and the price, because a lot of these bids are cost plus, to the original cost source. It doesn't matter what type of bid you're doing. You could be doing a production bid for a program, you could be doing a spares or maintenance bid, you could be doing engineering services. You've got to link that cost back that you're proposing to the government back to the source of that cost. What assumptions did you make? What was the hourly rate? What was the purchase contract? What was the vendor quotation that was used?
So you mentioned the production estimating and the purchase part estimating. Do you think you could provide a bit of clarification between those and maybe how the challenges are showing up differently between the production estimating, purchase part estimating, engineering estimatings, and the spares and support?
Yeah. So fundamentally, aerospace and defense companies are running three different types of business. And different companies have different mixes. So there's engineering work, which is more labor-based. It's less repetitive. You might be doing R&D for the government. You might be doing prototype manufacturing. You might be doing design, a lot of design. So it's very labor-intense, some material, low-rate production. And then there's production work, which is the bulk, obviously, what everyone thinks of when you buy a helicopter, when you buy a weapon, when you buy a radar system. It's being manufactured. It has make parts and buy parts, purchase parts in it. So you're basically producing a part and installing it. There will be some services around installation, but essentially you're producing something. And then the third area is spares and support. And spares, obviously, you're shipping out parts on a piece part basis, but support, you're doing maintenance services. It could be under warranty, part of the original delivery of the item, but it also could be under a maintenance contract. So you're being paid to maintain and repair and overhaul the equipment, because this equipment lasts a long time, typically in the field for 20 to 40 years. So there's a lot of money spent on supporting that equipment over its lifetime. The challenges are quite similar in many ways. There's some differences, obviously. Data volumes, for example, would be really in production estimating. That's where you've got a large volume of data. Engineering estimates, not a much volume of data. A few labor resources. It's not that complicated. Spares, not much data volume either. Maintenance and production have much bigger data volumes. There's also a challenge to get history out of your estimating system. So often these companies run ERP, they often run SAP, ERP. SAP is very well entrenched among this, particularly the larger A&D, aerospace and defense firms. And it's got a lot of cost history in it already, all the production orders, all the service orders, all the sales orders, all the purchase orders, all the contracts. But you can't get that out. That's the challenge. And a lot of these estimating tools that people use, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's a desktop tool, they're not necessarily connected to SAP, and they can't pull that information out. So then you start writing custom reports to get that data out. People start manipulating it in big spreadsheets, and that's where the challenge is coming.
Right. So, you do have like this kind of law of large numbers things happening, right? Where, you have these bombs again, 50,000 part bombs, and then it's multiplied by potentially the cost source history of every one of those widgets that is going into this assembly. And the idea is we use code and we use programming to go ahead and chug through all that data. Certainly a job for computers and machines, much more so than any human or teams of humans could do with any sort of efficiency. And that's where our technology comes in with the serious value add.
Right. And so with the increasing competition that's showing up in the industry and budget constraints and all these challenges, how do you two suggest that A&D companies can optimize their pricing strategies to maintain profitability without sacrificing any value?
So the first thing A&D companies need to do is to really get the information in front of the experts. So people talk about the art and the science of estimating and pricing, the science being the data, manipulating the data, adding it up, having the system calculate, and the art being the estimator apply their knowledge, their expertise on top. But before you can do the art, you need the science, so you need the data. So integration to that cost history in your ERP system. That's one of the most important things an A&D firm can do. They can basically pull out that cost history in a structured way, in a way that feeds directly into the estimating tool. And then the estimating tool can basically calculate, crunch the numbers, and come up with a cost. It's more about coming up with a cost. Even on a fixed fee contract, you want to come up with a cost so you know what your margin is, and especially on a cost plus contract. So that's the first thing. And that information isn't static either, it's changing. So for example, if you you're doing an estimate, sometimes taking 4 to 6 months to submit the proposal and agree it and negotiate it. During that time, there's more purchase history occurring, there's more production occurring. So you're getting new data occurring. So being notified about that new information and how it affects the estimate. Perhaps the government wants you to do what's called a sweep, which is to revisit the estimate based on the latest information. Anything that's got cheaper, they want to know about, of course, because it should make the part cheaper. Of course, if it's got more expensive, they don't want to know about it, but that's a different story. Generally, having the system can back you up in both regards. So that's probably a very important thing. The second important thing is to have a single version of the truth or a single source of the truth. It sounds like common sense, but you'd be amazed how many firms use either multiple systems or manual desktop systems that don't talk to each other. I think we talked to one client where in order to get a big proposal out, especially for manufacturing or production, they go through 40 systems, 40 different systems are used to produce the labor estimates for engineering and the routings and the purchase orders and the buy parts and everything together, and then something's doing the factors and something's doing the pricing and something's doing the submittal, and it's very complicated. And inevitably, there's no single version of the truth. So when you get to the delivery of the project, or you win the project, and the folks that are doing delivery says this margin of 12% or whatever it was is not real. We can only deliver it with a 2% margin. This is before you've even started delivering it. The executives are going to start asking why. Why is delivery coming up with a completely different answer to what sales came up with? And the answer is because they're both working to different versions of the truth. So it's very important to have a single source of the truth. And I think that's quite easy, because if you have one system that you use for estimating, then there will be a single source of the truth, its database.
As far as being competitive and dealing with constrained budgets, it really is the budgets around, operational budgets, the amount of estimators that you can handle in your organization to do the work, right? This is where you want to leverage technology to do the heavy lift as much as possible, right? So, yes, this is certainly the single source of truth, but also once you have that single source of truth, having the processes in code to chug through that efficiently and give you a reasonable output that matches the regulations you're trying to comply with, gives you the data awareness of changes to your data as it's happening, what Richard talked about with the sweep mechanism. The other thing that we probably need to talk about as well, as far as being competitive, is ensuring that, yes, once you have a margin in place, what your target margin is, being able to have the awareness to defend that margin, right? To not start at, a 30% margin, and by the time you're done with negotiations and you're done with your sweep analysis, it's been whittled down to 24, 25%. It's acknowledging what those risks are to your margin upfront, looking at their probability, costing out that probability, et cetera, to defend your margin, to do the things that perhaps some of your other competitors aren't doing.
Yeah, and that's really important on fixed price contracts. So there's definitely a push towards fixed fee contracts as opposed to cost plus contracts. And there will be more of a push now with the Trump administration towards fixed fee contracts. And that's good for the customer, no question at all. But it puts the onus on the supplier, on the aerospace and defense firm, to understand the risk much better than what it does in the cost plus contract. Because with a cost plus contract, the risk is fundamentally on the customer, fundamentally. With a fixed fee contract, the risk is on the supplier. So understanding your confidence in your estimate, there's a big difference between $1 million for a certain assembly, plus or minus 50,000 or plus or minus 5%, or $1 million plus or minus 500,000, plus or minus 50%. There's a huge difference, even though the price is the same. So understanding the risk, as Alan said, and being able to categorize those risks and explain them to the government, to the customer, that allows you to justify a larger margin perhaps than they would otherwise stomach.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for those insights. I think those are really important things that many firms could take away and utilize in their own strategies today. And so moving on, how do government contracts and regulatory requirements impact pricing decisions today in A&D firms? And what are some strategies that can help them stay competitive while remaining compliant?
So lots of ways. The big one is TINA, Truth in Negotiations Act, also called TCOPD, which I don't remember what it stands for. But essentially what they both say is that if your contract is worth more than a certain threshold, $2 million, you need to provide cost and pricing information. Now, what does that mean? That means if you're selling something to the government for $1 million, you don't have to provide as much detail about how you derived that price. If it's $3 million, you do. You need to provide all the assumptions and the cost basis. Even if it's a fixed fee contract, you still have to provide the assumptions and the cost basis. The government want you to go open book. They want to understand your cost and your margins. They expect you to make a profit, and that's where the risks come in, but you have to provide the cost information. And that goes down to suppliers as well. So obviously most people are buying a lot of stuff, buying a lot of content that goes into an end product. We live in an ecosystem. Companies are not operating in isolation of each other. So any vendor or supplier which is providing more than $2 million of product into your end item also has to provide a cost and price detail. So now you're going to your vendor to get the cost and price detail. You're doing it for them if they don't want to do it. And you're providing that to the government for every single vendor. So that's certainly a major area of regulation, which I think will be will be retained, if anything expanded. There is some other regulation around small business administration, around offsets. So different foreign, especially foreign sales, will request certain offset percentages to be offset into their country. And the US government in particular has historically required a certain amount of small business, minority, veteran, women-owned, etc. But I don't think that's going to be a lot of emphasis on that in the near future. Anything you want to add, Alan? No.
Once you reach a certain threshold, as Richard was saying, the $2 million threshold on Tina, things have to go out to bid. And, so that you can show like, yes, we went to market. Yes, it's not just the supplier saying it is a $2 million part. We've gone out to three different vendors. Three different vendors have given us 2 million, 2.1 million, 2.2 million. And then to the government, you say, hey, we are going with the, best value option. Which might be 2 million. If it's more than 2 million, it's something that you would then have to defend.
Yeah, I mean, they're two different concepts, really. So going out to competition is all about getting the lowest price. So there'll be, there's always been pressure on the government to, get the lowest price from vendors. The suppliers are keen, obviously, not to do competitive bids where possible. And there's different ways to achieve that. One way is by having a specialty service or product that no one else can provide. You're the only one that does something. Or you can literally convince the customer that there's no need to go through the RFP process, which is an administration. But as Alan was saying, the emphasis is going to be much more on competition in the future. It's obviously nothing new to aerospace and defense firms to have competition, but if anything, it's going to increase.
And then I guess continuing looking towards the future and looking ahead, what are some estimating innovations that you two foresee shaping more of the future of the aerospace and defense industry?
So the big one, I think, is AI. So AI is obviously on the tip of everyone's tongue. We've heard clients say, no PowerPoint is approved without AI on it somewhere, pretty much in every company. A&D companies are very conservative in nature, so they're always late to the table. Understandably, they're in a highly regulated industry making very complex products. So they're not going to be at the forefront of adopting AI, but they do things in spades when they do them. So it is coming, definitely, for aerospace and defense firms, even if it may be a few years behind some other industries. And the big areas where AI is going to come is in this proposal pricing and estimating. And there's two reasons why AI is going to hit this really big. The first is proposals are very text intensive. So when you submit a bid to the government, you have pages and pages of text, probably 300 pages for a large bid. And some of it's boilerplate, maybe copied, whatever, but a lot of it is not, a lot of it's generated. And it has to be good quality. So that's a classic area where AI can improve things by not writing the final text, but certainly by drafting the initial text. And the text generation capabilities that have recently been released, starting with ChatGPT, obviously with DeepSeek and other models now coming in as well. All of the aerospace and defense firms are paying very close attention to this. And it's an area where I think proposal response is going to be an area where text generation will be very valuable. And then the other area is in machine learning and data science. Bid and proposal, especially cost estimating, is a very data intense area, as we've talked about. There could be tens of thousands of material components making up an aircraft carrier which is being sold, or a fighter jet, or a helicopter that's being sold. You might be delivering hundreds of end items in all different configurations, different options, different sets. So you can imagine very quickly you've got millions and millions of records that basically justify your material consumption and demand and supply and so on. So it's a very data-intensive area, and there's a lot of cost history, and that cost history can teach you a lot. It can teach you about escalation and inflation. It can teach you about quantity curving. It can teach you about learning curves, how you get faster at things as you do them. It can teach you about how different the unit cost changes as you order more. That's the quantity curving. So if you order more, you pay less per unit, economic lot sizing, and so on. It can teach you about factors, so perhaps program management is 7% of engineering, or quality testing is 12% of production, or shipping and freight is 3% of purchase material cost. A lot of these things have historically been kind of just plugged in. Oh, let's plug in 3% as the shipping cost. We can justify that. Now it's going to be much more about, let's look at the actual data. I mean, I think it happened informally in the past. People probably ran a financial report, looked at their shipping fees, looked at their purchase burden, the purchase overhead, the purchase base cost, sorry, and worked out that shipping was roughly 3%. Maybe it was rounded up a bit. But now it's going to be much more real time. We'll be able to calculate it based on real data. So that's where AI is going to play, I think, in those two areas. One is on the calculation and the analysis and learning from the cost source history, that rich history in your ERP system, and the other is going to be on proposal text generation.
Yeah, and just on top of that, when we talk about AI and machine learning, and I'll take your example of shipping costs, right? If you look at, the shipping markets, over the last 4 years, we've had wild swings in shipping costs, because, the Suez Canal gets blocked up, or there's stuff going on in Yemen, and, freight is now going around Africa, or, whatever the costs in the Panama Canal are this day. And I think what we're going to see is more and more integrated data, so that data is labeled, we're training on it, we're getting real time, or as real time as we can get, to integrate that into our calculations. But when it comes to AI and machine learning and the heuristics of it all, we generate in cost estimating tremendous volumes of data, and Richard had touched on a number of these things. But to be able to label that data and to put it through the various AI heuristics of it all to come out with a reasonable answer that matches up closely to the discretion of a human estimator as they would have done it is an enormous heavy lift that I think the industry is looking for at this point. So
Because it'll save a lot of time, I assume.
yeah. We'll think about
Well,
it from a standpoint of cycle time. There's the cycle time of doing the cost estimating of purchasing. There's the cycle time of doing the cost estimating of manufacturing, the labor side of it. They don't always fall in sync, right? Some lag others. A lot of times you're waiting on vendors to get back to you on their RFPs for relatively large cost items in your proposal. The faster you can get out a proposal, the faster you can get out an RFX to get your vendors to respond back to you. And as the suppliers downstream from you are also innovating, are also increasing or decreasing their cycle times, the industry will become more efficient, leveraging that technology to overall reduce the cycle times from the bottom up.
Speaking of vendor RFPs, the vendor quotation process has generally been a lag behind other areas in terms of automation. So clearly finance got automated very early on. No one's probably had a manual financial system for perhaps 50 years. And then with the onset of MRP and production information and bills of material, the whole production cycle got automated. And that's kind of where SAP came in, to basically bring that into a centralized system. But areas like pricing and estimating, and some maintenance areas, and vendor quotes are three areas that generally lagged. Not that there are not tools available to do vendor quotations. Coupa, Ariba, SAP has its own tool now called product sourcing. There are plenty of tools out there in the market to manage vendor quotes. But customers have not universally adopted those tools. And the reason for it is vendor quotations are notoriously vague and unstructured in their format. So often the vendor sends an email or quotation on paper. It's not structured exactly how you want it. And getting them to follow a certain structure, it's possible for simple products, absolutely. There's plenty of online systems where vendors can bid or price things. They can even do what's called reverse auctions. But for complex products with complex specs, especially new materials that need to be designed, it gets quite hard to have a very structured approach. People have tried. As I mentioned, there are systems out there. There are standards like EDI, which is a data exchange standard. There's networks like EchoStar, which is a network lots of A&D firms have signed up to share information. But it's fair to say, I think, in this journey of automating and including vendors and partners into the ecosystem, into one single source of the truth, I think we're fairly new to this. And I think that's an area of innovation that will occur over the next decade. And I think that, frankly speaking, most large tier one firms will have all their tier two vendors connected to their pricing and estimating tools. So as the vendors put quotes into their tool, whatever tool they're putting it into, if they're submitting it on like a form, if they're doing it in a vendor portal, if they're doing it through Ariba, Coupa, or SAP product sourcing, or if they're doing it straight into our tool, for example, it's going to feed directly into the quote much faster. And that's when you're going to get the cycle time down, because as Alan said, you're often waiting for vendor responses. They take a certain amount of time, and then purchasing, supply chain are dealing with that. They're trying to make an award, but they don't want to make an award because we haven't won the contract yet. If all of that was plugged into one tool, it'd be so much more efficient, and you could reduce the turnaround time dramatically.
Thank you for all those insights and your suggestions for current A&D firms on how to improve their pricing strategies. Is there any last thoughts you want to share on the industry? Anything else you thought of?
So there's one more area of improvement of pricing strategy.
Cool.
So we talked about it. I mean, we talked about the shift from cost plus to fixed fee, but I want to reiterate that. So we talked about it in terms of where they are today, but in terms of the future. So we will have more fixed fee contracts. We're convinced of that. I'm as convinced of that as I am of more defense spending going to Europe, which is also going to happen. But as the result of fixed fee contracts is risk is transferred from the customer to the supplier, margin can increase. Don't think fixed fee equals losing money or losing margin. In theory, you get paid for that risk being transferred to you. Therefore, your margin goes up. But the onus now is absolutely on the A&D company, the supplier, to properly estimate that cost. So in a cost plus contract, they just had to convince the government that the cost was okay, and then you could wing it, and you could deliver the thing, and you could be over, and people complained, but they essentially sucked it up and lived with it. But on a fixed fee contract, the customer doesn't care. I'll pay the same amount regardless. So now the supplier is dealing with it, the Aerospace and Defense company. And, we've heard about, I think, Air Force One, they're complaining about the planes being late, and then Boeing is saying they lost $1 billion on this fixed fee contract because it's fixed fee. And obviously the suppliers don't like fixed fee contracts, but the customer, the government, are pushing in that direction. So the pressure is on to accurately estimate your cost. Now, like never before, these companies need a centralized cost estimating tool and a pricing tool that considers risk and confidence and uncertainty, but at the same time pulls in the information, all that rich cost source history from your ERP system, and applies AI on top of it. And that's what's going to happen. So all these points are coming together. We're going to use AI, we're going to have integrated systems, we're going to include our partners, and we're going to be able to deal with the transfer to fixed fee contracts by doing more accurate costing.
And all those points you mentioned that a tool needs to have in order to accurately estimate for the fixed fee, those are all things that the 25 tool has embedded in.
Yes.
Right?
25 is designed specifically around A&D firms and the challenges they face in terms of costing and pricing. The spectrum from engineering to production to spares and maintenance contracts. It's the only tool that really does that spans all the different types of contracts. There are other tools available which have been around perhaps a bit longer that focus on labor estimating. Labor estimating is the easiest conceptually. There's plenty of spreadsheets that do it very well too. But there are other tools that focus on labor estimating or assume you're going to manually input or upload the materials from a spreadsheet. But what 25 does is it really replicates the ERP system. So it does, for example, simulation MRP, consolidates the BOM, does all the lot sizing and all that, does all the quantity curving, does all the escalation. So it does a lot of sophisticated things beyond what I would call basic things like distribution and parametric estimating. It does that as well, and pricing for different types of contract, cost plus, fixed fee, T&M, etc., power by the hour, etc. So 25 is designed specifically for this problem. I wouldn't say we're 100% done. We're constantly evolving the tool. We're definitely expanding in the area of AI ourselves, so that's a work in process. But we are very much focused on this problem, and we're probably the main company that's available that's focused on this problem. And the other thing about 25 is we're very much in bed with SAP. So we built ourselves our tool on SAP's platform. It's built in SAP's technology. It does ensure a clean core with SAP, but it's basically built using their platform because we recognize that 9 out of 10 top aerospace and defense firms use SAP. Doesn't mean the one that doesn't can't use our tool, but certainly the benefit of getting that cost source history out of your ERP system is stronger if you're using SAP, which 9 out of 10 are.
Anything to add, Ellen?
Yeah, I think it's a great time to be a cost estimator right now. Tools are now available that haven't been before. So if you were a cost estimator with 40 plus cost estimating, tools at your disposal, there's potential to have a single source of truth. And with policy shifting to more of a fixed firm price contract structure, and companies realizing that increased risk to their side of the equation, it's the onus is going to be to get the best cost estimators with the best cost tools in your organization. So yeah, I think it's a great time to be in cost estimating right now. And as far as the industry is concerned, the defense spending overall, it has a general trend of up. I think with that you want the best tools and you want the best people.
And the aerospace is on the way up as well. So there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of emphasis on space, and passenger flight miles are going up. So the commercial sector is on the way up as well. But as you say, defense spending is not going down, especially not in Europe. But it's definitely a good time to be a cost estimator. You'll be living in a period of change, of course. So it's also a challenging time, but it's a great time to be a cost estimator.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing all your thoughts, insights, knowledge, challenges you've seen. It sounds like we're kind of at a transition change point for the industry, which is exciting. So, with that, we'll close the episode. Thank you again, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.